Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize in the interest of time. We started late, and there's a very important, as you alluded to, moment that this commission will have an opportunity to participate in at 3:30. So I will try to go as quickly as I can, and I'll have some additional questions, if you don't mind, that you could perhaps answer in writing. First of all, I want to thank you for coming. You didn't have to, and I suspect, especially in your case, Mr. Arpey, that your lawyers may have advised you not to. So I appreciate very much your coming here and trying to help us get the full and complete accounting that we are tasked as a consequence of the legislation that created this commission. It's also important to say that you weren't just selected by us because you can help us from the standpoint of American United. As a company, you suffered in a personal way, but you also suffered in an economic way, and you can help us because you, perhaps in America, no two companies have a greater sense of urgency to understand both what happened and what do we do today to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you were selected by the conspirators, and one of the things I'm going to try to make this point slightly different than I've made before. The people who perpetrated these acts on the 11th September, they don't feel remorse. They don't feel shame. They didn't target the pilot. They weren't going after somebody and then accidentally kill some additional people as a consequence. They were trying to kill as many as possible. It's a religious beginning. I don't believe all Muslims by any extent believe this. I don't see all Muslims this way at all. This is an extreme form of Islam, but it is a religious belief, and it's not new. It didn't just spring on us in 2001. Although risk grew considerably in 2001. Osama bin Laden began with a relationship actually with us in Afghanistan, but he declared in 1998 a fatwa, and my guess is 19 participants responded to that fatwa. And participated as a consequence. And I think it's very important to understand that because we continue to put this word terrorism over the top of this for some reason that's beyond my reach. And I think it makes it difficult for us both to understand the why and more importantly, the what do we need to do. And I would like to begin by asking you, perhaps it's you, Mr. Arpey, first, or you, Mr. Ahern, because you had some significant response in this area. What's your understanding of the law, the 44902 section of U.S. Code Title 49? Seems to be very specific that you have the responsibility, as well as the authority, to refuse to transport people that you consider to be at risk to the passengers on the airline. I mean, do you believe you have, under that law, a responsibility to prevent, or do you believe your responsibility is merely to deter?
Well, maybe I could start and Tim could jump in. I think, Senator, the important thing to remember in both a pre-9/11 and even in a post-9/11 world is that the airlines are responsible for implementing the security procedures that are given to us by the federal government, who have the ability to make the threat assessments, take all of this intelligence data, take that information, put it through whatever intelligence sources are necessary, and turn it into a security paradigm on which we can implement. And in the pre-9/11 environment, that's what we had done, and I think we were good stewards in the pre-9/11 environment in terms of doing what we were asked to do. But as I said in my in my introductory remarks, nobody anticipated the type of threat that we encountered on the morning of September 11th.
Let me press that a bit, because National Security Advisor Rice made a very famous statement in which he said nobody could have predicted this. I disagree with that. I mean, I absolutely disagree with that. I mean, you're talking, I presume that you've got safety precautions dealing with a plane that's fully loaded with 70,000 pounds of jet fuel that you consider to be dangerous all by itself as a consequence of having the flammable material on it. I presume that you've got procedures to deal with a pilot or two pilots that might wig out, and I presume that you've got procedures to screen your own pilots to make certain that something terrible doesn't happen. And you may not have been able to say, oh my God, maybe suicide is going to be a part of this thing, but even there, I must say, given what was going on, again, in the Islamic extremist groups, they were using suicide technology. I mean, if they were using the technology of suicide to accomplish their objectives increasingly. So, I mean, even there, I must say, I have a difficult time with an argument, gee, nobody could have predicted this, because I think if you're thinking about, trying to prevent all instances like this, it seems to me that would have been on the list.
Well, again, Senator, I'll just be candid with you. If you go back to the morning of 9/11, the entire security paradigm that was in place, given to us by the FAA, did not anticipate this type of threat.
But you keep saying that it's the FAA that's telling you, but I must tell you that the law doesn't mention the FAA. The law says an air carrier, quote, an air carrier may refuse to transport a passenger or property the carrier decides is or might be inimical to safety, end of quote. Doesn't mention the FAA at all. I presume that you're familiar with the list of prohibited passengers.
Yes, sir.
That you have to implement that.
Yes.
And do you participate in that? Do you say, gee, the list is too small, the list is too big? I mean, I'm talking about pre-9/11. We've been given the list of 15 people, at least by at least on the surface, it looks like 13 of them were in some way connected to Islamic extremism.
Well, I think, and Tim, jump in here, but that list, I think, came out of the FAA's own threat assessment of what the industry should be trying to protect itself against. And they came up with that list, and on the basis of that list, we put in procedures to screen.
Were any of you at the I think it was April and May 2000 briefing that the FAA security people did with airline officials?
Staff was.
Were you there, Ed?
No, I wasn't, but my staff was.
And what did they report back to you? Have you seen the CD-ROM presentation?
Yes.
Did you see to it prior to 9/11?
Probably. I'm very familiar with it, yes. Could I build,
Sure.
Senator Kerrey, on your question? The law that you talk about, quite frankly, when you read it as you do, it would presume that the burden is upon the carrier. But if I could share some history with you, how that law has been applied to us, is that when we have tried to deny boarding, most recently after 9/11, 38 of our captains denied boarding to people they thought were a threat. Those people filed complaints with the DOT, we were sued, and we were asked not to do it again. So the burden upon us was to only take those people off of the flight who we knew posed a threat. And the only way we can know that they pose a threat is through those who identify them. Quite frankly, at United, and I know at American, in the mid-90s, there were customers who assaulted our passengers. We created our own list of those people who committed violent acts on our airplanes to keep them off the airplane. We were reminded quite frequently that unless they posed an immediate threat, we were disobeying the common carrier rules.
But if you just take the first, in April of 2000, April 24, 2000, the Security Directive 95 comes up. I presume you're familiar with this. If not, I can show you the list as well. Have you seen this list?
Yes, I know. I'm familiar with it.
So they got 6 guys on here.
Right.
All of whom have some relationship with Ramzi Youssef.
Right.
Right? So
Right.
you get the list. What do you do about that?
There are a number of things we do with it. Some of them I think I would prefer to discuss in a private session because those are part of procedures today. But those lists were distributed not only to the field as a list, because 6 names is pretty easy to manage. I might, you probably know already, Senator, that list grew to over 1,800 within a week. Managing that becomes much more complex. Those names are fairly easy. Many people have common names, and what becomes very, very complex is if we have someone whose name, to use a generic name, is John Smith, and we have a list that says deny boarding to John Smith, and quite frankly, the Arab names are repeat very, very frequently, then we may have 500 or 600 people with that name on any given day. Now, we have to be able to, in a very short time frame, identify which one is the one on the list. And so as the list grows, the handling of that, you can do some of it with computer services, but much of it has to be done with hand phone lines and so forth. Now, there are contingencies in place at the present time that have helped that
But
significantly.
why didn't we modify what do you call the on-flight security procedures, the common strategy? Why didn't we modify that common strategy to accommodate the possibility that suicide could be something that the pilot would, that a hijacker would select?
First of all, Senator Kerrey, the common strategy, I'm glad you said modified, because if you look at history, the common strategy saved a lot of lives. To react in a violent way in the past to many of the hijackers would have cost many, many lives. And so the common strategy, as with regard to how it interfaced with government agencies, did change over time. What we asked the folks on board to do, again, I would say to you that while the emphasis, in fact, at a noted government hearing after the Gore Commission, the Rand Corporation produced a witness that said, these people are not suicidal. He happened to be an Israeli consultant. So when we looked at the possibility of hijacking, we at United practiced hijacking 4 times after 1999. Various forms of hijacking, to include an anthrax on the airplane. We practiced with the FBI, with other government agencies, to ascertain how we could react. But the idea that they would be able to train people to fly complex airliners and navigate them was something that none of us contemplated.
Why?
I would assume that the type of training we give to pilots is very, very sophisticated. These were all glass cockpit airplanes.
No, but I mean, the why comes from you were training for the possibility of hijacking.
Yes.
And by the way, the procedures in this particular case seem to be seriously flawed at the passenger screening level. We heard earlier, this commission has heard that if I'm carrying a blade that's smaller than 4 inches, that and I've been screened and they find it, they give it back to me pre-9/11. I mean, it seems to me even there's vulnerabilities that were rather substantial to be able to take a plane over. But given all the, again, even in this presentation that was done in 2000, but all the threat assessments that were being done in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, they had to include some discussion of suicide. As I mentioned, the word I used earlier was suicide has become a technology. Suicide attacks have become a technology that increasingly is being used by, again, largely people that are motivated by religion against us.
I think, first of all, that is a fact that today we are very, very aware, after what's been happening in Israel, that suicide is something that they will do. But the thought that they would be able to have the technical skill to fly an airplane, that level of education, Senator Kerrey, in honesty with you, you are a trained spec ops person. Mm-hmm. You know as well as I, sir, that these people could have gotten on that airplane stark naked and done what they did.
Yes, they could have.
So all of this discussion, you and I both know that if we were taking knives away, they would have planned the spec op around those knives not being there.
But this is where I will send some written questions to you, because I've got serious questions about the current strategy on the airlines today. A lot of it seems to me, is reactive. A lot of it seems to be politically motivated more than it is motivated by real security concerns. And I'd very much like, I'll do it in writing to you, because I'd very much like to get feedback from you all, because I'd like very much for our part of our recommendations to be to say, quit being motivated by politics here. Let's figure out what the right solution is and do it, whether it's the FAA's responsibility or your responsibility. These 19 guys knocked us over just as easy as could be. They exploited every visible weakness. And you're exactly right. Once they were on that plane, their chances of failure were practically zero. And I think you've got to help us, especially I think on the intel side. Though I think it's unarguable if you look at the presentation that was done in May of 2000 by the FAA. The FAA can't just say as they've done. They've given us 5 or 6 pages of rebuttal to the Joint Committee saying, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know. It's like, I mean, how many times can you say we didn't know before somebody says, Jesus, you should have. It was your responsibility. You should have asked if you don't know. I didn't want to make the FBI mad. I didn't want to make the CIA mad. I mean, given all the things that were going on, again, the background of 98, 99, and 2000 and 2001, I think you all can help us a lot, not just to understand what happened that day, which I'm sure makes you feel worse than it makes me in many ways, because they were your employees, you're associated with it in a very active and upfront way. You've got to help us by being very frank, not right now, because this commission's got a lot of other commissioners ask questions, but you've got to, in writing, tell us what aren't we doing that we should be doing. Whether if it's a national identification card, do you think that's what it ought to be? Tell us. I have to worry about the National Rifle Association. I don't have to worry about civil libertarians. I only have to worry about what you tell me that should be done. And by the way, I'm a customer. And when the commission finishes its work today, I'm taking the train back to New York. In no small measure because I find the security procedures not only to be a nuisance, but I think they're largely ineffective. You're exactly right. Buck naked, I sit on that plane and say, well, I hope, I hope they've got this thing figured out because, well, first of all, they've never let me on. That would really be obnoxious, let me on buck naked. But you're not anxious to see it. I hope that you'll help us by being as honest as you possibly can and as frank and as detailed as you possibly can about what we aren't doing that we ought to be doing to prevent this in the future.
Senator Kerrey, I would look forward to that. I think I agree with the things you have said and have participated at the National Academy and other places. I think it's very, very important that we focus on the future, but we also recognize that these people were highly skilled military professionals, and the only way we stay ahead of them is to have an iterative process that grows continuously, and that we understand there is no one pill nor no amount of blame that will solve the problem. We need to have a system that continuously improves itself.
And one of the last things I say is I hope that I'm asking you, don't call this terrorism. It is terrorism, but it's coming from a relatively small group of Muslims who religiously believe in killing infidels. That's the pathway to heaven. And everybody in this room is an infidel. And it's enormously important that we begin with that. Otherwise, we, in the first instance, are unable to identify what the risk is. But in the second instance, there's a tendency to have the wrong policies and procedures that make it difficult for us to be very discriminating to identify people who are genuinely a risk to us. I'm through.